Politics, hosted by Steve Hickson with co-hosts John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. This is Backfire.
Hey, good morning, Cleveland. Welcome to another exciting edition of Backfire this morning with John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. We have a special guest in the studio this morning, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Engel, ROTC and head of ROTC for Bradley High School.
Yes, sir.
Retired military.
Retired.
Wearing a new colored uniform. I thought he was in the Air Force when he walked in this morning wearing this blue and white, but I was an Army guy, and he's telling me that's the new uniform.
Army service uniform, they call it.
Well, welcome to the studio this morning, Chris. Anything you want to start with, John?
Well, I just wanted Chris to come because I was active in ROTC at Bradley High School in the 70s, was there the last year that the program was active during that time. That was a little different time in America, a tough time, but it was a wonderful program. It has been an asset and influenced my life the entire way through. I have memories of camp at Fort Knox where I got to do things at 16 and 17 that most people didn't get to do, shooting. Actually, I twisted my ankle in a game and missed getting to shoot the M60 machine gun. And you think about that, I'm 53 and that still eats away at me that I didn't get to shoot the M60 machine gun.
Did you get to throw any grenades?
We threw the dummy training grenades and fought with pugil sticks, which was a real interesting. I was being nice and I knocked the boy down and let him get back up, which the drill sergeants weren't real happy with. And then he knocked me down and he hit me while I was down. And I guess, you have to determine what the rules of engagement are. And so I knocked him down a second time, and that time I let go of the forward grip and took it like a baseball bat and beat him, to which point the drill sergeants complimented me and told me that was great. So I did learn. But it teaches you discipline, it teaches you respect, it teaches you it's Army, but to throw a little bit to the Marines, you learn to improvise and overcome obstacles. You don't learn to stop at an obstacle. You just step back, look at it, figure out a different way to accomplish your goal.
Go over and through it, whatever you got to do. Yeah.
Right. So I was thrilled that Bradley got the program back, and I just wanted to give Chris a chance to come in and talk about the program, and I hope more and more kids will take advantage of this opportunity.
Colonel Engel, tell us a little bit about your past history, and what I guess I'm more concerned about this morning is you came up through the military, retired 22 years,
Yes,
and you went through the ROTC program in college, I guess.
Sure did.
Anyway, you can tell us about that, but tell us how the military's changed. First thing I noticed was a different colored uniform this morning, so tell us a little bit about how the military's changed.
Well, just in 30 years since I've been started off in junior ROTC at East Ridge, going through that program, and then ROTC at UTC. Obviously the uniforms have changed. What the doctor was talking about being able to fire the M60 at camps and things of that nature. That has changed enormously over the years. We've gone to everybody is so safety conscious about everything. Today, there's virtually no way in the world these kids would ever get a chance to fire, an M60 machine gun, because there's so many safety things. It's still a blast. Don't get me wrong. We still manage to do a ton of things. But just for instance, when I was coming through ROTC, both ROTCs, junior and senior, I was on the rifle team and we shot with 22 small bore competition rifles. Now we shoot with pellet guns, air CO2 charged pellet guns. Right. It's still marksmanship. You still learn the same thing, but that's a big change, over the years.
Those pellet guns, and then this is me throwing in for the hypocrisy here. They'll shoot through you, won't they? The pellet gun.
I don't know that it would shoot through you. It stings when you get hit. But whether it would, I don't think it'd go through you, but it would definitely leave a mark.
You have to have the same safety precautions no
It's
matter
the
what.
same,
So it's
yeah.
silly. And again, to be political, and he's not going to be political, but we've got 6-year-olds in the Middle East who hate us, who are shooting AK-47s at
Yep.
6 and 7 years old, and we're protecting our little flowers from a .22 rifle in a controlled environment.
Yep. Yep.
It's amazing, isn't it?
What are you suggesting there, John?
We're becoming a sissified nation.
No, I'm asking what you're suggesting that we do.
I'm suggesting that we look at the broader world. I'm suggesting we quit being afraid of our own shadow, and we train young men and young women to be somewhat tough. And they do. Don't get me wrong, they do. But just what he's saying, it didn't dawn on me. I had forgotten that they've gone away from the .22. I qualified at Fort Knox with the Colt 45, which was the service gun at the time, and the M16. Now, I grew up hunting. It wasn't real new to me, but I'd never shot a M16 before.
Yeah.
Everybody is so afraid now of an accident. Because nowadays, if something happens,
Lawsuits.
it's not your fault. It's somebody else's fault. And who can we sue?
Yeah.
And it literally, it's gotten to the point now to where if we do anything, any type of activity, I make sure, again, to cover myself, to cover the program, to cover the military, to cover the cadet command, I make sure I get a parental waiver for literally everything. Now, does that cover everything possible? I have no idea. I'm not a lawyer, but it's gotten to that point. It really has. It's gotten to the point where we are so afraid to make a mistake that.
Well, would you agree with John's earlier point that the generation of kids who come into the program have a different series of experiences in their background than the ones who probably did 30 years ago?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing,
well, and
I don't
that's
know.
the point. I
Yeah.
think. I remember getting my first .22 rifle, and I remember nobody giving me any instruction whatsoever and turning me loose with it.
And yet you're
I
still
don't-
alive, and you didn't kill anybody.
Well, I don't think I killed anybody,
But
but
as
I
far
have
as
a
you know.
feeling that I fired it a few times in directions I probably shouldn't have because
Yep.
nobody really taught me anything.
Yep.
But
And
I
my
don't know
dad
that was necessarily an uncommon experience back
Right.
then.
Yeah.
But
And my dad
increasing-
taught me tons of
Mm-hmm.
things about weapons. I mean, I grew up, we moved from Eastridge to Flat Rock, Alabama, and that's where I learned to shoot and hunt and fish and do all those things. And have I fired the weapon in a direction I shouldn't have? Yep, probably did.
Yeah.
The problem I think with the kids these days is they've been standing in corners all their lives. I don't know, and maybe I'm being harsh when I say that. And people,
Well, part of the problem, too, though, is some of this is ideological. We don't have a problem in the world sending our kid up to Ocoee River and letting them work at 16 as a guide on the river, a Class 4, Class 5 rapid river, which has actually taken people's lives.
Sure.
But we don't want a qualified military professional to instruct them in how to shoot a .22 rifle. Now think about the
I agree.
and we let them jump, parachute jump. We've got parents that go, he wanted to do that. God, that's one of the most dangerous things in the world you can do. But we won't let them shoot a gun. And right as we speak, there's been an hour-long firefight in downtown Paris apartment between jihadis and the Paris police. Now, this is an apartment building full of people. These people are not experienced to be able to deal with the world that's intruding on us as we speak. And that's what worries me. We're raising now the Army trains great people, but for example, the 18-year-old that joins the Army, goes to boot camp and is trained, comes home, is not legally allowed to have a pistol on his body until he's 21. Now, we'll send him into a battlefield to fight, and he is a trained military professional after boot camp, but he can't have a gun back here on the homeland.
what's going on with the basic training these days? How's it changed?
Again, kind of the kinder, gentler, we talk about, when he was coming in, them using, pugil sticks to simulate, if you will, some type of combat battle, that type thing. Nowadays, coming through both high school especially, they don't want cadets touching other cadets. So we don't simulate any type of combat, any type of fighting, anything along those lines. Now, basic training gets into a little bit, but nowhere near what it was back in the 70s and early 80s. Again, you've got everybody so scared and so paranoid of things. I'm just not sure.
Are you saying that graduates of basic training aren't ready?
I'm not
what
saying
they're going to experience.
Ready is a relative term. Ready is a relative term. When you came out of dental school, were you ready to?
Well, you can't simulate actual combat, right?
Well, that's exactly right. But I mean, like I said, ready is a relative
we
term.
simulated actual dental work.
Right.
We simulated the actual environment, and eventually we worked into working on real patients.
I mean, I have
because
I
I was
know
gonna
we have a lot of policy differences, but what I have not detected is that our military forces being placed into combat have underperformed. They seem to be performing pretty well when they're there.
No doubt.
So presumably the training must be going well.
The training is going well, but again, everything is a relative. Everything is a relative term. Everything, you have to look at things on a scale. If it were me and I was training, I would go through much harder, much tougher situations, so that when you got into one of those combat situations, one of those really, really stressful situations, you could perform, hopefully, at slightly a higher level. Because the difference between living and dying in a situation like that can be a matter of not just seconds, but milliseconds, how quickly you can react to a situation. So, and you guys know this as well, if you've seen a situation before, if you've gone through something before,
Sure.
your reaction times and your critical thinking periods normally are much quicker, much better than someone who hasn't gone through that. And that could be the difference in not just your life, but your buddy's life, your friend's life, a village, whatever
and I
it is.
assume what the military does these days is when they have a new series of graduates from basic training, they don't just send them in as a unit by themselves. They integrate them into other units
Exactly.
who have experience,
who
can mentor
Yes.
them and
Yes.
show them
Let
rules.
me
right?
interject, because actually that's where I was going to go. There is a vast difference between deciding on a mission and choosing which units you send in, because you're going to send battle-ready units in. And the situation we found ourselves in World War II, where young men went through basic
Sure.
training and ended up in the battlefield. So my point is, you never know when that kind of situation is going to arise. And if we had to do that scenario today, the boys and girls going through basic training are not trained as effectively as they were in past generations.
Well, if you think about World War II, when we first entered, we were not ready. We were not prepared. We were not trained. We didn't have the resources, the people, the guns, the equipment. We were simply not ready. And unfortunately, the first year or two, a lot of innocent
Sure.
people died, in my opinion, needlessly, because we had ramped down so far from World War I that we simply were not prepared. And this is...
And we're below World War II levels now in our military.
Colonel
Far
Engel,
below.
let me ask you something. If we were pushed into a war scenario right now, do you think the military we have is ready to take on anything?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you think that training's been properly done? Do you think the troop levels are sufficient?
Troop levels? No, I don't believe they are.
Equipment?
Equipment? Not really. Again, it's a relative term.
He raises a really valid point there, and this is something I harp on all the time. Right? It's very easy to take a very hawkish view of the military when it's a very small swath of the population who's actually doing the fighting and dying.
It is.
Well, we'd like that swath to actually be bigger, Franklin.
Well,
it's
okay.
lower than it was in World War II.
Okay, we
So
had
back
something
to your
called
own
the draft
point. Let's
then,
get some
though.
more- Well,
It wasn't all volunteer.
Look, Franklin, we forced people. This administration has forced people out. They have forced
Yes.
high-ranking officers out of the military. We have the smallest Navy since pre-World War II.
That's not
We haven't.
It is true.
We
Franklin.
haven't
Look
been.
it up.
We haven't been listening to our military advisor.
Which ones?
The ones that
You think they all have unanimity
The
on these
ones
issues?
that
I don't think they
advised against
do.
Pulling out of Iraq, the ones that advised higher troop levels in Afghanistan. All of those people.
It's a situation, in my opinion, if, God forbid, something really, really, really serious happens, could we recover? Could we ramp up like we did in World War II? Could we make those changes fast enough to be incredibly effective and win? I believe so, but kind of my point is, at what point is too low? At what point is too high? Right now, in my opinion, it's a little too low, because
Sure.
your freedom, you're only going to get, in theory, you could only get one shot at this, and no pun intended, one shot at it. And if your strength level, if your levels of training are not to the point where they need to be, that one shot could pass you by in a devastating way.
I think everything you're saying is valid. But we have an all-volunteer force right now.
Yes, we do.
Right?
I think it's the way it should be.
I mean, what percentage of volunteers are we turning away?
Well, you're talking going from a strength level, they're talking going from 475 to all the way down to 410, and that's just
65,000 people this year alone, Frank.
I mean, that's not what I'm talking about.
But the point is, those were all people that were in, Franklin. They didn't voluntarily quit. They were forced out.
A lot of people who finished their third and fourth tours, they may be ready to come out.
No doubt.
Okay? And because we're asking too much from them.
I agree. And that's kind of the point, too. That's kind of the point. If it's too small, somebody has to do 2 or 3 rotations.
One of the complaints about President Bush was that he activated the Guard and he activated the reserves, and he was asking too much of them. The reason he had to do that is because the Clinton administration had severely reduced the size of the military. You've got generals now serving, Franklin, who serve this president, who have said our force levels are too low. We need more men and women in the service.
Well, first of all, it has been a rare thing in our nation's history that our generals have said we have too many soldiers. That doesn't happen very often.
You're right.
It's a rare thing.
Right. They don't have to write the check to pay them.
That's right. That's right. And it's entirely proper for us to have a conversation about what our force levels will be. You mentioned the Navy a minute ago. Actually, the plan over the next 15 years is to increase the size of the Navy about 20 ships, which is actually a fairly larger number than we've
Franklin,
had
just
for a while.
perspective, in the
military, I actually agreed. Hold on, let me
say one thing before you let that sit. The Clinton administration reduced the carrier groups from, I believe it was 37 carrier groups down to about 18. That's almost a 50% reduction in the carrier groups. So before you start talking about us adding 20 ships, he devastated hundreds of ships out of the service.
Well,
now go ahead.
Some of those are also dilapidated ships that we don't have the money to replace. And that's part of the debate that I'm talking about. It's really easy to be a cheerleader for being more aggressive if you don't really have skin in the game. My point is, we're asking a very small part of the population to carry the highest burden here. And we're not really doing anything to expand the size of that in terms of the sacrifice that we ask everybody else to do. One of my big arguments about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan is that we didn't ask anybody else to do anything.
We have the largest coalition in the world.
No, we sent our people over there, and we did what? We didn't ask the rest of us to pay anything extra to pay for it. Are you telling me
you're going to vote for Donald Trump now?
No, I'm not telling you that. What I am telling you is that we ought to have a comprehensive discussion about what, as a society, we do and what we owe our country and those who are going to serve.
Well, Franklin, let me throw out.
And we're just asking too much from too few instead of spreading that out.
Let me even fewer.
Let me ask you a question.
That's the problem.
Let me ask a question here.
Well, John, you're going to have to step up and pay.
You know what? I'm going to cut some of the welfare programs. You want to ask people to sacrifice something? Let's quit spending so much money on the defense budget is less than 3% of the total budget, Franklin. Less than 3%.
Yes, and welfare is
and you're complaining about the 3%. The entitlements are over 80, close to 80%.
Have an honest discussion.
80%, Franklin, versus 3%.
Social Security.
No, that's not an entitlement. That's your Democratic scare tactic.
All right, if there was a draft, if we were forced to a situation where we had to have another draft, where would we be?
quite frankly, unless we get in a situation where we have a global type of conflict, where we're fighting multiple fronts, and right now
We're close to that.
We're getting close to that. But if we get in a situation where we're fighting multiple fronts, multiple countries with hundreds of thousands, not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands, God forbid the draft, could come back again. That's one of those things where I'm not sure that that's ever going to be the right answer.
Do you think the kids these days could handle it?
I'm the liberal Democrat here.
Yeah.
But I would.
Wait a minute. You said it liberal.
But I would support some alternative of either military service or other national service right now.
Look, I
do
will
that
tell
right
you, my
now,
wife and I,
but I'm willing to pay for it.
Franklin,
too.
my wife and I disagree on this, but I've said all along, I think 2 years of compulsory service would, and I want it for a different reason. I don't want it for the numbers. I want it because I think it instills some discipline and some integrity in the population. I want it for the
We're talking
effect
about automatic
on their character. Yeah, but now, Steve, to your point earlier, you asked him if we had an event, could the troops do it? That's not the question. The question is if we had, no, the question earlier where you asked him, would they be capable enough?
Yes.
The question is, would your casualty numbers be higher or be lower with the current training versus earlier training?
Yes,
and
sir.
my fear is the casualties will be higher. For example, Franklin, we're bragging right now about these women that are going through the Special Forces training. Guess what we found out? We found out they were given multiple attempts to accomplish goals. None of the men have ever been. You wash out the first failure. We found out that they were given special training. They had actual tutors basically going through the program on the front end. None of the men in history have ever gotten that. So the problem with that is it looks good on a social science paper, and it looks good to all the social justice people who are now running the Department of Defense. But when you stick that woman out in the field with the other Navy SEALs, she's a weak link because she didn't meet the same standard that the men met. Now, I'm all for a woman if she meets the standards, but we lowered the standards in order to achieve a social agenda. That's dangerous.
Yes, it is. I was drafted, and I'll tell you one thing: when you're drafted during a conflict, and then when you go get on that airplane and start and leave America,
Raises the pucker factor, doesn't it?
it changes the world and the way you think about it. So,
Sure it does.
I just don't know if the kids these days could handle that.
I think the kids will rise, but I think
That's just
you'll
it.
have
They will.
You'll
But
have a higher casualty rate.
How long will that take, and what's the casualty rate? You're talking about the 2-year service. I don't know if this is appropriate for the show, but I don't know if you guys have ever seen a movie, Starship Troopers. They fought bugs, and so it's kind of a rock'em sock'em robots kind of a situation. But one of the premises of the movie was if you served in some form of military or whatever, you then became a citizen. You got the right to vote and things of that nature. Interesting concept.
We talked about that in the immigration debate.
Very, very interesting concept.
That if you want to serve, then you can earn your citizenship.
Yeah.
Israel requires every citizen to serve.
Yeah. But the problem with that is the problem you run into, and coming up as both a troop and a leader, what you want is you want people to be there. You really do. You need and want people
Who want to be there.
who want to be there. The problem you run into if you've got some type of a draft situation or if you've got some type of comprehensive service, you may have somebody on your team that doesn't want to be there. And that can be as detrimental as somebody who's simply not trained.
Trained well enough.
That's and it's the same thing in ROTC. I want kids who want to be there. And it's one of those things where if you don't want to be here, hey, no harm, no foul. Go do underwater basket weaving or go do whatever it is that you want to do. I've got no problem with that. I want kids who want to be in the program and want to do well.
The modern threat environment that the military is dealing with right now is a much different kind of training than the military traditionally provided in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
You're right.
Because the
It's
threat's
changed.
different.
Absolutely.
We're not talking about leading 100,000 people across a field anymore.
That's right.
We're talking about, an urban warfare environment.
We're not talking about those kind of changes. What we're talking about, for example, the pugil sticks that he mentioned. Are you telling me that in an urban environment, the average soldier will not be presented with a hand-to-hand combat situation?
What I am telling you, John, is the ability to train somebody in 6 or 8 weeks of basic training is dramatically different.
Especially when you're not teaching them hand-to-hand combat. Our point here is not the time. Fine, Franklin, if you want 8 weeks, if you want 10 weeks, fine. That's not the point. The point is we're not going into some of the areas that we used to go in because of political correctness, and it will end up getting men and women killed. Plain and simple. So all you good liberal progressives can sit back and go, well, we didn't have them beat each other up at Fort Knox. Of course, that jihadi lopped their head off.
I prefer to think that I'm a realist about it, John.
You're not a realist. The jihadis will kill you any way possible.
I think you think that all you have to do is pass a couple of laws, and magically all these problems will be solved.
No, I can't get rid of all your progressive attitudes with a couple of laws, but it would be a start.
I think if you're going to have an all-volunteer service, you darn well ought to consider raising the pay and the benefits for the military. Personally,
that's always about the money with you, isn't it? I'm for that, Franklin, but
I think the military is underpaid.
I agree. But guess what? One of the reasons they're underpaid is because the people on disability have shot up over 50% under this president. Those are people that will suck off the government for the rest of their lives, and that is money that can't be spent on the military.
Are you committing right now to increasing military pay and benefits?
Absolutely. The Republicans tried to do it 2 weeks ago, and the Democrats and the president threatened to veto and defeated it.
With all due respect, John,
why is pay
when the president took office, he killed the proposal that had been put in place by his predecessor, which was actually cutting projected benefits.
We just passed an increase
in
the military budget, and the president said he would not sign any increase in the military budget unless there was a comparable increase in the entitlement budget. Like we don't already spend enough there. And by the way, if you want to talk about cutting things, he cut the military missile installation in Poland right off the bat, and that's the reason the Russians have now been annexing all the neighboring Eastern European nations, because
that's a big lift.
It's not a big lift.
It is a big lift.
You got everybody in the world saying the first thing we ought to do to help trim the Russians back is redo that missile installation that he cut right off the bat. On top of that, Franklin, it was already negotiated. It was a done deal. He killed it for pure political ideology.
That's what civilian commanders do, John.
Well, guess what,
bring
Franklin?
a different perspective.
We've had 7 years of his disengagement from the world, and I'm going to ask you what I've asked you every couple of months when another hotspot blows up. The world is he is Nero fiddling while Rome burns. Your own Democrat mainstream media is starting to hammer
what
on
I
him
think,
for it.
What I think, John, is that you have to consider the fact that there is a point where every military involvement sometimes loses the
Franklin,
support
the world's
of
burning
the
down
populace.
everywhere.
And if you can't make that case, and it's very difficult to have continued making that case, I think the president was responding to what the majority of Americans wanted at that point. Yeah,
really?
I do.
I don't think he responded to anything.
us.
What about? Well, let's take a break. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson. We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into cash. Need help paying for life's little emergencies? Get the cash you need today from your friends at Check into Cash.
Get a payday advance today for up to $425. At Check into Cash, we make it quick, easy, and confidential.
Get the cash you need now at Check into Cash. Visit checkintocash.com for the store near you.
Borrowers often use payday advances over a period of months, which can be expensive. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
Did you know that U.S. Money Shops cashes all checks, even the ones most check cashers reject? Tax refund checks, government checks, payroll checks, and many more. And when you cash a check with U.S. Money Shops, we'll give you 10% off your next purchase. At U.S. Money Shops, we have everything you need at a fraction of regular retail. So stop by one of our 11 locations or visit us online at usmoneyshops.com.
Buy or sell or buy today, the better way at U.S. Money Shops.
Some restrictions may apply. See store for details.
Hey Whoopsters, this is Johnny B. Jonesy, and I'm located at the Check in the Cash off Treasury Drive. That's next to the new Walmart, right between Cato's and the Tandy Company. Come visit me if you're in a financial pinch. We offer products all the way up to $425 on our payday advances, $2,500 on our title loans, and $4,000 on our line of credit. That offers the lowest rate guarantee when we buy out titles anywhere, anytime. And that is 2314 Treasury Drive, Cleveland, Tennessee. And that number, 423-479-2166. New customers, mention Whoop FM and get cash back on your first loan. That's checking the cash. Ka-ching!
At Buy Here, Pay Here USA, we don't just sell cars, we buy them. Bring your car, truck, or SUV down to Buy Here, Pay Here USA, and we'll give you a free appraisal with no obligation. We pay top dollar for most cars, so before you trade in your vehicle, come see us for an appraisal. At Buy Here, Pay Here USA, we pay the most for your car. Visit Buy Here, Pay Here USA in Cleveland, Dayton, or Chattanooga, or go to buyheresellhere.com. That's buyheresellhere.com. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
If you need a little green, Lending Frog is making deals. He'll lend you cash on any kind of wheels. Borrow just a little, or you can borrow big. Lending Frog is a new financial gig. It's hip to hop into cash. LendingFrog.com is making a splash. Dig it, dig it. Dig it, dig it.
Hello, my name is Andy Figglestaller with Ed Jacobs & Associates. We are an employee benefit and insurance broker in business for the past 20 years. The new healthcare law, also known as Obamacare, has finally arrived. The law is complex and the choices are confusing. You have questions, we have the answers. It is our passion to find cost-effective solutions for every client. The solutions will be different for every person or business. Let our knowledge, experience, and passion go to work for you. Contact us today and let us assist you through this process. Our phone number is 423-473-0202, or you can find us on the web at edjacobs.com.
Train Endurance Engineers are an elite group of extremely devoted individuals who stop at nothing to push our heating and cooling units to the brink. That way, when they pick up the pieces, they'll know exactly how to make the train we install in your home even more reliable. Right now, their target is a Train AC unit.
Test and control. Fire up the pitching machine.
Their methods may seem unconventional.
Okay, cue the jackhammers.
But it's because of their tireless efforts that it's hard to stop a train.
When you want an unconventionally efficient heating and air unit that keeps your home right in the comfort zone day in and day out, nothing will do but a Train. To get the best Train service, call your local Train comfort specialist. Mechanical Systems, 336-5739. Keeping you comfortable is Mechanical Systems' only business, and they've been providing high-quality service and installations for more than 30 years. Mechanical Systems, 336-5739. That's 336-5739.
It's hard to stop a train. Really hard.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson on Whoop FM. Call 423-614-5553 to join in on the conversation. Now, back to Backfire.
Here we go.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're live again, guys. Welcome back. Welcome back. John Stanberry, Franklin Chansey, and Lieutenant Colonel Chris Ingalls with us this morning. Anyway, we've been kind of humble so far. There's so much stuff going on. Out in Missouri, we had the protesting going on, and you know the president of the campus had to resign, and you know other campuses are starting protests now. What is going on?
I think it's a sign of what John was saying. It's the sissification of American youth.
It is.
Back in the 60s, we had real protests and people didn't quit.
Yeah, you had real protests about something. I disagreed with the protesters. The boy that was on the hunger strike at Missouri University, his father made $8.5 million last year. Somehow, I don't think he's real put upon. The student body president who claimed the KKK came later had to admit that that wasn't true. So you have two administrators who have now resigned over basically nothing.
Here's a picture of a girl carrying she's a senior visual arts student at Columbia University, carrying a mattress in protest over the lack of...
That's Mattress Girl.
Yeah, she was raped on it, but
she wasn't.
Anyway, she's a visual arts student. I mean, and now you're saying she wasn't raped.
No,
okay.
The boy is suing them right now because she had no proof whatsoever. He now has texts that show it was completely consensual both before the sexual encounter and after the sexual encounter, and yet she has still done that. But she's not the problem. She's a student. The professor at Missouri University that threatened and called for muscle to have the student journalist removed.
Right.
Here are some of the courses that she has a graduate certificate in advanced feminist studies from Amherst.
What's happened to her, John?
Nothing, actually. That's
not
another cowardly
She's
event.
been suspended.
No, she resigned her honorary appointment to the journalism department, but she was a communications professor. But here's the problem, Franklin. She did a program on more drinking, less thinking, fewer teeth, and beer. That was one of her programs on My Redneck Wedding. She teaches a course in 50 Shades of Post-Feminism on the 50 Shades of Grey novel. She teaches one on The Trouble with Thomas, a closer look at the children's series. She's against Thomas the Train. Apparently that's dangerous. She teaches about Martha Stewart. And here's the best one. She got a government grant to go to a Twilight convention because she teaches a course on the Twilight novels. I'm so glad that our people will graduate from her classes with a intimate ability to deal with the Twilight phenomenon. I bet there's a lot of money in that out there.
What's going on with our education system to allow this kind of crap?
Talk to the folks in Missouri. They paid for it.
Well, Missouri, Kansas is now in an uproar.
It's on a lot of these campuses.
The Yale student who yelled at her faculty, the president of, I don't know how they're organized, but apparently they have like a president and a vice president of their dorms, and the dorms function as entities. She's screaming in his face, telling him to shut up, and then screams at him, "Who hired you? Who hired you?" Well, guess what? Yeah. She hired him. She was on the interview committee that interviewed him and hired him.
Wow.
By the way, Franklin, did you see what happened in Dartmouth?
I did not see what happened at Dartmouth.
Let me read you what happened in Dartmouth. About 150 Black Lives Matter protesters from the campus marched into the library and started shouting, "F you, you filthy white Fs. F you, you filthy white Fs, and your comfort, and your racist SHIT." They pushed one girl up against the wall and told her, "Stand the F up, you filthy, racist white piece of S." They entered into the study rooms.
Can we get a
and
bleep
forced
machine?
So you're doing a really good job doing that.
I really can't read it. Because
Daniel, can you beep for us?
Here, you want to hit the bell when you...
And guess what Dartmouth has done? Now, this went on. They threatened people. They physically accosted people. Do you know what Dartmouth has done?
Nothing.
They apologized to the protesters. They told them that there was a conservative media out there that was very harsh. So you have people that came into the library. White students were not doing anything. A couple of by the way, there's another protest. I'm not sure which town which university it's at, but the black student group actually demanded that the protest be shut down because it was white students who organized the event. Now, it was in support of them, but they said, well, you really need to come get our permission before you do any of this.
Next item I want to talk about real quick is in 270 cities, they're fixing to do a show of force. It's going to be the largest show of force in 3 years since they launched a series of rallies to call for a higher pay and a fight for $15 an hour. This is backed by the Service Employees International Union.
Government Workers Union. huge contributor to the White House and to the Democrat coffers.
So the union's pushing for these people to get the higher minimum wage,
Right,
because it means more for them.
Well, their contracts are negotiated off of multiples of the minimum wage. So if you have a $5 increase in the minimum wage, most of these union contracts are 2 and 3 times minimum wage. So that means a $15 increase for the union member.
Has anybody not figured this out? Maybe I know somebody else has, but has anybody not figured out that if you raise the minimum wage, any amount, doesn't matter, if you raise the minimum wage, that means that everybody else's wages
have to go
up too. And if you're a businessman, that means that the price of your product has to go up.
Or employment has to go down.
That's exactly right. So
the price of groceries is going to go up.
Well, the CBO estimated that the minimum wage increase they're asking for, I think it was a couple of dollars, not the $5, would result in about 500,000 lost jobs.
Yeah. It's hard to know that part, but the economic side is really easy to figure out.
You have to charge more.
You have to charge more. So you might have more money in your pocket, but it buys exactly
less.
the same or less. It doesn't make sense.
Except that for all the period of time that the wage has been where it is, we've still had inflation going on. So the current wage goes less far than it did when it was passed.
Well, Franklin, the reason we have inflation going on is because the current politically motivated Fed is printing $85 billion a month in the basement of the Treasury.
John, we don't have significant inflation right now.
Well, then which is it, Frank? You just said inflation was eating away at it. Now
no, I didn't, John. This is typical you.
No,
the wage has been there for more than a year. It's been there more than 2 years. Over the last 2 to 3 years, we've had practically no inflation in this country.
Well, actually,
over that period of time,
we have
had inflation.
Okay, if there's very little inflation, what is the push?
Over that short period of time.
Right. So what is the push to raise
because the minimum wage right now, in terms of its buying power, is significantly less than it was.
How long does the average minimum wage person work at minimum
wage? People
wage?
who are earning minimum wage really can't function
Franklin,
as well as people.
How long?
It's not meant to.
The
minimum wage is not meant to.
The problem right now, Franklin, is employers can't find employees because they're making too damn much money over here at the Social Security office. Everything they can draw, making $35, $45 a year draw.
Apparently they can find employees because wages have not been pushed up, and that's what you expect to happen.
They've actually gone down under this president.
If you think there's a shortage of labor, you would expect wages to go up. That's the law of supply and demand.
Franklin, when you take oil out of the picture, inflation has actually ticked up. The huge drop in the oil prices, and there's some argument about whether we should be counting oil in the inflation gauge.
Actually, if you take the cost, over the 10-year period of time,
you just said a year
cost out of it in oil.
Well, you mean the medical costs that we were told were going to go down, but are actually increasing significantly after Obamacare?
Franklin, if you make $35,000 a year not working, or make $25,000 a year,
$35,000 a year not working.
Actually, you're wrong. I'll give you the numbers.
You're wrong. You can make more money
a year
not
ago,
working than you can working.
This is a year
That's
ago,
the
Franklin.
problem.
The average government dependent, when you added up the value of the housing and the food stamps and everything, made $42,800 and such dollars. The average taxpayer made $42,200. So the average government dependent is now actually living at a higher standard of living than the average taxpayer. That is a collapsing system, which is what's happening all through Europe with you all's progressive policies.
Socialism is a wonderful idea until you run out of other people's money. Yep.
Are you for the pipeline? Anybody for the pipeline?
Absolutely. The unions were for the pipeline.
What's it supposed to accomplish?
How about getting more options?
I like Donald Trump's answer. They asked
what's it supposed to accomplish?
More options. It gives us more options.
Well, I tell you what it would accomplish.
It doesn't give us more options because all that money, all that oil is designated for sale overseas.
All right, let's
all of it.
Every bit. You asked me a question, I'm going to answer. What about safety?
Safety.
Yeah, safety.
Safety.
Well, I don't understand your question.
Well, trucks on the road, are they not dangerous?
Sure they are.
Okay. Well, the president has said his own State Department gave the okay, the environmental okay to. He said
not
first
truck down there. It's going to go to a pipeline offshore up there.
Franklin,
That
the
can be
president
changed in a
said
heartbeat.
that it was the environmental safety was the problem, and he was waiting for the review from his own State Department.
Okay.
That came in 2 years ago, and they said that it was completely environmentally safe. He then continued to refuse to okay it, and now when he's okayed it, what's it based on? Because let me give you some statistics. Every 90 minutes, there is a train collision or a derailment. Look at the paper last week. There were 2 oil car derailments. A train carrying hazardous
we have a
cargo derails
dilapidated
approximately
infrastructure
every
there.
2 weeks in the United States.
I don't doubt that at all.
The U.S. Department of Transportation reports last July that over the next decade, there will be an average of 10 derailments a year of trains hauling
Gonna get
crude
worse,
oil
too.
or ethanol. This year, rails are expected to move nearly 900,000 carloads of oil and ethanol.
How many pipeline ruptures have there been in the United States in the last year, John? I bet you don't have that number.
I don't
do
have
you?
that, but it's nowhere near
It's a
this.
significant number, more
it's
than you
not-
think.
it's not that much. It's not
let me
anywhere near
ask
that
you
much.
another
Maybe
little
not.
question.
But you want to increase that.
You're all for this attack on wealth and
I'm not for an attack on
and
wealth.
Wall Street. Let me ask you a question.
I think Wall Street's done pretty darn
Do you
well.
know who owns the rail company that hauls all of this oil?
I bet he's a Democrat. Anybody want to bet?
In place of the pipeline.
I bet he's a
Which
Democrat.
rail company? There's
The
lots of
number
them.
one Canadian Northwestern rail line. Do you know who owns it?
No, I do not know.
Warren Buffett.
I do not know who
Warren
owns the
Buffett
Canadian
owns that,
Railway.
who happens to be a
So you
huge
th-
supporter
so you-
of the president.
So
Guess
you
what?
think the
Now, wait a
Keystone
minute.
Pipeline
Guess what
was
else he
killed
owns?
because they want to help Warren Buffett?
Guess what else he owns, Franklin? Last year, he bought the only 2 companies that produce all of the oil tanker cars in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So Warren Buffett, who supported killing the Keystone Pipeline, who supported President Obama, just happens to own the rail line and the company producing the rail cars that will now get to
Except
carry
I
all that
repeat
oil.
again, John, all of the oil supposed to go through that pipeline is designated for international export.
But his
none of
argument
it
for
to be
killing
done in
it,
the United
Franklin, was
States.
that it's
But that
dirty
can be
oil.
switched. That can be switched in a heartbeat.
Yes.
You don't own the pipeline.
No, it doesn't
A
matter.
Canadian company owns it.
Hey,
You
Frank,
can't
do you agree
switch
with
that
that?
at all.
I got it. Do you agree with this?
Did you like Trump's answer when he was asked if he was for the pipeline?
I'm not sure which answer it was.
He only gave
it
one
was
answer.
this one or the old one.
He said yes, he was for the pipeline.
You mean like
And-
Hillary's original, I'm for it, and now she's against it?
And he also said, if we let them bring it through here, let's get 25% of the profits. Let's take it.
And Franklin, it's the Canadian
Okay.
company that
Okay.
was building the pipeline, so of course they're going to use the pipeline. They're the ones building
I
it.
didn't say they weren't going to
You
use
just
the
argued
pipeline.
with Chris over whether.
What I said was he can't designate where the oil's going to
Why
go.
would they build a pipeline and not send the oil through it through the United States?
Why would they need to send it to Louisiana if they want to sell the oil in the United
Well, I
States?
guess if
Why
I was
couldn't they
working
just
out-
refine it in Canada?
You're right, Franklin, but if I was a oil worker in Louisiana, I'd be damned happy they sent it to me. And just that's why the union
Because they're
supported it.
sending it overseas.
Yes, and
That is the point,
Franklin,
John.
the point is we can get a piece of it. We could actually refine it here,
There you
and
go.
our refining technology is actually more better for the ecology than the Chinese refining.
Is it better? Is it better than pushing the conversion toward natural gas? I don't think so.
Let me explain this to you, Franklin. Your guy,
You're
the
gonna be
president,
pushing.
said, we think it's dirty oil, and so I'm canceling the pipeline. That supposes that canceling the pipeline would mean the oil stays in the ground. It doesn't. It comes out of the ground no matter what. By canceling the pipeline, he has killed American jobs, American profit, and he has sent the oil to a country that will burn it worse. So he has effectively made the world dirtier, made the environment worse, not better. That's his own logic, Franklin.
Except what he got was the vast majority of the world.
What he got
to
was
sign on to.
Except China.
The first,
China
actually,
doesn't.
China
China's
did
not
too.
participant.
Yes, they are.
And by the Franklin,
Yes, they are. And they are the first time ever they've agreed to limitations on their emissions. First time ever.
But do you agree that if the pipeline went in, it would give us more options?
No, I don't agree with that.
So the fact that oil is coming through us and that we could, really, how can you not see that?
Well, the first thing is, why would we be helping, if that's your real view, okay, why wouldn't you spend whatever resources you have in more fracking in America
Here's
to
why.
get America?
Okay. Here's why.
If that's your view.
Okay. Here it is. In a stress situation, and by that I mean a wartime situation,
Mm-hmm.
you must have your own reserves
For oil.
that you can pull. World War II proved this. Okay, you must have your own reserves that you can call on. You don't need to be buying and borrowing steel, oil, all the natural resources. We have an abundance of it here in our country. However, during a wartime situation, a big wartime situation, we must call on our own reserves to help us.
You don't think we'd be able to call on the Canadians to help out with that?
You don't know that.
Well, Franklin, let me ask you a question.
If the
Well, you don't
Canadians
know
are
that.
not
It
on
is-
their side in a war, we're
but
in
bottom
deep
line,
trouble.
let me finish.
Well,
Let me finish.
they
this.
might be mad
It
at
is-
us as we didn't put the pipelines in.
It is
right?
far better to use someone else's resources than to use your own, because, again, in a stress situation, in a wartime situation, when you really need those natural resources, you've got to have them. If you don't have them,
Well,
bad
Franklin,
things happen.
Let me ask you a much simpler question, okay?
Okay.
Do you have city water in your house?
I do.
Why don't you have a well with a bucket, and you could just go out every day and bring a bucket of water into your house?
Because I'm happy paying the
So you-
fee that I pay for what I get.
So in other words, to Chris's point, if we had a pipeline and we had a emergency situation, you have a pipeline that you can get the oil immediately instead of a bucket running on a highway that could easily be bombed.
Oil production in the United States has quadrupled in the last 10 years.
Not because of this president, in spite of this president. It's all been on
Quadrupled,
private and
We
state
have
land.
more
Federal
oil-
land has actually
we
decreased,
have more
Franklin.
oil produced in the United States right
Against
now
you
than at
and
any
your wishes.
point
You
in
know
our
what?
history.
Hold on a minute.
Irrespective of who
we
gets
got
the
too much
credit,
to
that's
talk
not what
about.
I'm talking
Let's move
about.
on.
His argument
Hey,
is that we need to
we've
prepare
got so
for
much oil. Oil's gone up twice what it used to be, and
We've got so much
we
oil
have no
that the price
control
has
over
bottomed out.
what the price of a gallon.
And guess what?
Wait a
The
minute.
Iranians
Has gas
have said?
gone up? Has gas gone
They're
up?
going to increase their production, no matter what the Saudis want,
Hey,
which is going to drive the price
Franklin,
down further.
But wasn't it Obama that said we cannot drill our way to lower prices?
And he said, if my policies are enacted, energy prices will necessarily skyrocket. That was his own words.
Let's move on. We've got too much to talk about. Obama's not going to let. He's done everything wrong. So
Well,
let's
I'm
talk about
happy
some more
because he's
things.
made the Democratic unions mad with this one.
Oh, I know. Well, right now, let's talk about that. Is everything Obama's doing right now making you happy, Franklin?
Everything. No president has ever made me happy all the time.
Okay.
I'm a malcontent at heart. Not as malcontented as John.
What about the refugees out of Syria? Do you think he ought to be fighting this? And he's got 30-something
I think
states.
his answer yesterday, if you combined it with what Paul Ryan said, is the correct one.
Say that. Tell me what he said.
Well, Paul Ryan said maybe we ought to have a little pause and examine this further. I'm not going to criticize anybody for saying we need to think about the ramifications before we make decisions. But then the president also made a perfectly valid point. Are we really saying that we're not going to take widows and orphans? Honestly?
Widows.
Are we saying we're not going to take children who've been displaced
Well,
by
first
that?
off, Franklin, why?
I don't think that's a threat to our national security.
Why don't we make a
over
safe zone?
$100 million just last year to the Saudis for refugees? Why aren't these people being housed in Saudi Arabia and in Jordan and in Amman?
Why don't we make a safe zone for them?
We are the most generous nation
Could we
in the
make
world.
a safe zone for them?
Here?
No, in their own country.
In Saudi Arabia, we certainly could.
I don't think you can make a safe zone anywhere. If somebody wants to hurt you,
yeah.
If somebody wants to hurt you, it is proven.
To his point,
you can't
make a safe
you
zone
can't make
from
a safe
a
zone
suicide
anywhere.
vest. You know.
Especially if you have a 7-year-old carrying it.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, Franklin, the newest news out of Europe is that they've now found a third suspect who posed as a Syrian refugee in the Paris attacks.
So far, what we know for sure is that 4 of the 5 killed were French citizens, number one.
But 3 of them now have been linked to one of them's fingerprints. He had a fake Syrian passport, but his fingerprints.
There's one at issue right now.
There's 2 now.
Fair enough to look at.
There's 2.
Well, none of that's been confirmed yet.
Well, Franklin, let me ask you a question.
It just hadn't been. And that's all I'm saying is we need to get our facts straight.
I brought this in a couple of weeks ago that they estimated around 3 out of every 100 refugees would be an ISIS plant. Let's say it's only 1. Right now, the president wants to bring 10,000 in. That's 100 ISIS plants. The attack in Paris was about 12 or 13 people. So that's about 6 Paris attack squads in the United States just with the 10,000 he's talking about bringing in. And by the way, how many of these people he's brought in have been Christians? Do you know?
Well, I wouldn't know, John.
Well, so far we brought 2,098 Muslims in and 53 Christians.
I do know that it's probably not likely that what we do is ask people to declare the religion before we give them refugee
Franklin,
status.
but here's the problem with that.
That doesn't mean Christians can't get it.
Hang on a minute. Actually, it does appear that they can't, because 53 versus 2,098 is about 2%. The Christian population in Syria before this all blew up was 10%. So we're only bringing 2% in, but they were 10% of the population. So we're not even bringing in the representative population numbers. And one of the reasons is he's using the UN to vet these people. This is the same UN that was actually hiding Hamas terrorists in one of their headquarters.
Let's give a little
Christians
John.
don't report to the UN because they're afraid of the UN.
I didn't want to get these numbers right, but these same people who did this this terrible bombing in Paris, okay, they blew up, had a double suicide bombing in Beirut that killed 43 people, Muslims, last week.
So what? This is the homeland we're talking. I don't care about that, Franklin.
That's not the point we're talking about, John. The point is, these are evil people, and you're trying to somehow make the connection that because somebody has a particular religion that automatically makes them evil. I don't accept that premise, because I think there are
It's the
elements
likelihood.
out there. Well,
they're more likely.
How many are you willing to let into your house? How many are you willing to let into your house?
I think if you look into it, if you were really going to follow it to the logical conclusion, you'd be looking at whether they were Sunni or Shia.
You're right.
That would be
I'm all for that too.
But you're not going to do that.
Yes, I would do that. How many are you willing to let into your house?
How many am I letting into what in your house?
Look, the country is your house. So my point is, are you willing to open your own home to Syrian refugees?
I'll ask the question I asked a minute ago. Are you saying
I'm not willing? No, I'll give you an answer.
In?
No, I'm not letting them in my house. Are you going to let them in your house?
I probably would.
Well, let me give you just a quick little thing. How many ISIS terrorists can
I live next door to Steve here, so that's really
how many
important.
ISIS terrorists can the FBI track per day?
I have no idea.
They can track 60 to 70. By the way, there are more IRS agents than there are FBI agents. Do you know how many known ISIS terrorists we have in the country right now?
I don't know.
1,200. So they can only track
ISIS terrorists.
I'm sorry, that's FBI numbers, Franklin. You can argue with the president's own FBI.
Let me ask you a question, John. How many of those people are United States citizens?
Probably most of them.
Okay. So that's the difference that
You're missing the point.
No,
Franklin.
I'm not
There's
missing the point.
1,200 of them already here, and we can only track 60 to 70. Well, folks, when they're shooting up
here's the
Hamilton
point we're
Place
making.
Mall, feel good about yourself that you let these people in.
Here's the point we're making, John. Perhaps the focus ought to be on those people who are here rather than on the people who aren't here.
Did you
That's
see what
I'd
happened?
say.
Franklin,
I
did you see what
apologize for
happened
this, but I actually have to leave and go to my real job. And I want to thank Lieutenant Colonel Engel for coming. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Appreciate it. Good to meet you, sir.
I appreciate your service, and I value what you're doing.
Thank you.
And keep fighting
And he
the
wants
good
to get
fight.
you a pay raise
Well,
if you ain't got
Franklin,
it.
before you go, let me just say one thing. As far as your broader defense of Islam, in
I
the
didn't make a defense of anybody.
Turkey versus Greek soccer match yesterday, they had a moment of silence, and the fans booed the moment of silence and chanted Allah Akbar.
Here's what
That's the Muslim response.
Here's what I would say to you, John. Okay? Are you for the Saudis?
No,
Are you
actually,
for the Iranians?
They're the
Are you
leading
for the
sponsor
Syrians?
of most of the Wahhabi sect that is these terrorists.
So, listening to your theory, John, although everybody who blew up the World Trade Center came from Saudi Arabia, we invaded Iraq.
Frank.
Do you think that's something that the rest of us ought to be upset about? I think we should.
So once again,
what
it's
would
not this president's fault.
So what
it's
would I
Bush's
say?
fault.
When something else comes up, maybe, just maybe, we ought to take a deep breath and get our facts straight before we start
let me
shooting.
know when you
so that we know that we're shooting the correct people.
Let me know
instead of
when you
breeding
invite
another
the
generation
first
of
Syrian
killers.
refugee to your home.
We created this generation.
Let me
of
know
people who
when
hate
you
us.
invite the first refugee to your home.
Well, when they get to Cleveland, I will call you, John.
Let me know.
And I'll ask you to come over and break bread with us.
I'll be glad to, but they're not staying in my home. And I'll have a gun on when I come over.
I have a
John,
CCW
you've always got a gun on you. You've probably got 11 on you.
Well, you know what,
Okay.
Franklin? I would rather be over-prepared than sorry.
Franklin, I've got one last question.
We can be clear, you are over-prepared.
Franklin,
John.
I've got one last question. I know you got to go. Will you be voting for Bernie or Hillary?
I'll be voting for Hillary.
Okay.
Oh, my Lord.
Unless she's been indicted by then.
Okay.
Why hasn't she, by the way?
Oh, because it's this Justice Department.
Well,
Hey,
perhaps
Franklin's
you
been
can
real.
convince a majority of the American people you're right, and you won't have that issue. But I doubt it.
You know what? The number one military in the world is having nothing to do with this problem in France right now. The bombing's going on. The Russians, the French are.
We just hit a training
working hard.
camp. Tell me why the hell we didn't hit that training camp 2 weeks ago. We obviously knew where it was. Oh, by the way, the president's strategy that he said he's doubling down on, he's not even doing his own strategy. We're not giving any aid to the people he claims he's giving aid to.
You mean the strategy that has other people joining the coalition instead of
We're losing.
Franklin,
The whole world sees that we're losing. There's firefights in the streets of Paris, and you people are still going, hey, we're winning.
I'm so glad you now support the French, John, when you were boycotting French fries eight years ago.
Well, when even the French have more sense than we do, we're in trouble.
All right. Bye, Franklin. Let's see. There's something somebody sent me, and I just want to read this in an ending note, I guess, today, since I'm running over. There's 8 levels of control that must be obtained before you are able to create a socialist communist state. The first is the most important. 5 of the 8 are done. The last 3 are almost there. Healthcare control. Healthcare, and you control the people. Done. Poverty, increase the poverty level as high as possible. Poor people are easier to control, and they will not fight back if you are providing everything for them to live. Done. The debt increase, the national debt to an unsustainable level. That way, you are able to increase taxes, and this will produce more poverty. That's getting done. Gun control, remove the ability to defend themselves from the government. That way, you are able to create a political state, total control. Almost there. They keep working on it, but I don't think John Stanberry is going to let it happen. Welfare, take control of every aspect of their lives. Food, livestock, housing, and income. That's done. Education, take control of what people read and listen. To take control of what children learn in school. They're working on that. Religion, remove faith in God from the government and school. Almost there. Working on it. Class warfare. Divide the people into the wealthy against the poor. Racially divide. This will cause more discontent, and it will be easier to tax the wealthy with full support of the voting poor. Done. These are the basics, are all covered. We are ripe for the new world order right now.
Let me, one point you talked about removing religion. I just throw this out there and you all can think about it. This was from New Orleans Saints tight end Benjamin Watson tweeted the other day. I thought it was a really concise, good tweet. He said, as a nation, we have collectively prayed for Paris this week. Yet as a nation, we suspend a football coach for praying after a game. We must choose.
Gosh, amazing.
I have to head back to school.
Lieutenant Colonel Engel, great to have you.
Thoroughly appreciate the invite.
Great to have you, and you're welcome back anytime. Everybody stay tuned. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson, John Stanberry, and Franklin Chansey. Catch them again on Whoop FM at noon today and every Wednesday morning from 7:30 to 8:30. Now, back to more music on Whoop FM.